And you're very welcome back to the CESI Staffroom. We're in Season 3. Can you believe it? If you're back, what we're going... They say you should never mention dates in a podcast. Well, it's the 8th of September. I'm not going to mention the year. Some of you have already been back a couple of weeks. Some have been back a bit longer. And I don't know about you, but this year we really hit the ground running. From a tech point of view, there's teachers asking for stuff that have never asked me for this kind of stuff before. My name is Hassan Daba. I am your host for the next while or so. We do have some guest presenters. Hopefully will be coming in during Season 3. What is the CESI podcast? Well, the CESI podcast is... CESI, first of all, is the Computers in Education Society of Ireland, and they're 50 years old. Season 3 is going to carry that theme all the way through. CESI is 50, and it's growing all the time. Now, what is the Computers in Education Society of Ireland? Well, that's a hard one to explain. And during the course of Season 3, we're going to be looking at what it is to be CESI, which is the Computers in Education Society of Ireland. And think about it, it's 50 years old. So somebody had the foresight to set up Computers in Education Society of Ireland 50 years ago when there was no computers in school, or at least very little or very few computers in education. So it's going to be interesting to get their take on it, how it was, and the journey to how it is. But we can't really start Season 3 without doing a bit of a recap on Season 2. Season 2 was a good one. From my point of view, I got to interview some very interesting people. One of the most interesting people I got to interview, to be fair, everybody was very interesting, but Ewan McIntosh, I wasn't expecting this. Ewan is an educator. He set up No Tosh. He's also responsible for TeachMeet. So if you ever heard any of your colleagues or indeed CESI talking about TeachMeets, it's his fault. It's all his fault. We spoke to him about TeachMeets with Ma Examined on the One podcast, and of course you can go back and listen to it. We also spoke to Ewan about groovy work. What's groovy work? Well, let's hear from Ewan.
My colleague Brad Carter in Tokyo, he's a Canadian in Tokyo, and even that might give you a clue as to his attitude in life. He's been part of our team for the last 18 months on some really challenging projects in the Middle East and other places internationally, but working at distance and strange time zones, which is never easy. And occasionally I get worried about other people's energy working on those kinds of time zones and with those kinds of deadlines. And there's two things he shared recently. We shared them in our provocation newsletter. This one was, I think, just last week even, that you can, when you're being asked to do work, he generally says either yup, nope, or groovy. Yup means I'll do it. It won't take me 2 minutes. It's probably quicker for me to do it than you to do it. Nope means no. Shut up, move on. I'm not going to do it. And groovy means not only will I do it, but I'll probably invest far more time than you're paying me for to do it because I'll enjoy doing it. And I think that's a very healthy approach to take to invitations to do things or requests. And then the other thing that he taught me over the past 18 months is the choices we all take in life about the work we do. His thing is to do, and it sounds a bit hippie maybe, but his choice is to do cool work with cool people in cool places. Now, if you're a teacher in your school, you might kind of think, well, I'm stuck with two of those things. I have no control over those things. But even just cool work, make your work cool. And I think that you can complain about standards, you can complain about testing, you can complain about so many things in teaching, but there's actually a lot to love in it. And you've got to this is a good point, a spring clean almost. Audit everything you're doing. Ask yourself what you're going to stop. Ask yourself what you're going to keep doing. And then the fun part is, well, actually the fun part is what you're going to get rid of, what you're going to stop. But the other fun part is what are you going to start? And I think if you do go to a TeachMeet, you should go having already done that audit and worked out what you're stopping so that you've got room on your slate to get something new in there. And that should be cool. It should be cool. Don't take on noble work that you feel you've got to do. I wouldn't do a PhD. I couldn't write in the ivory tower language of a PhD. However, when Mags has done that, I would love to get my teeth stuck into translating it into plain English that I can understand.
You're hired.
That's fun. That would be groovy work. And I think that people are it's worth getting into that mindset of realizing you don't always have to do everything you're asked to do. Everyone's got a degree of agency, but sometimes you just have to have the courage to say nope, so that you can say yup and groovy to more things.
I love the idea of go to a teach meet and think about what you're going to remove, what you're going to stop. Because
you got to do that before you go. You got to do it before you go. Clean the slate.
Don't go and go, I'm going to do something new. Just decide before you go, okay, I'm going to stop this.
Well, I think that it ties in quite nicely, actually, because we're talking about adult learning, and the reason your staff room can't be that place is because it's the wrong context, it's the wrong time, with the wrong people, the wrong politics, the wrong energy, and the wrong drink in your hand. It's all the wrong stuff. So the context for adult learning is something that's often neglected, and not just in education, but in life. So with an incredible woman, Andreea Mitrea in Romania, she approached us just before the first lockdown of the pandemic began to hit, and was actually about to pull the plug on the project. And we said, look, all of our other customers have left us. We lost 85% of our customers in the space of 10 days. And I said, I've got time, which is rare. Let's just do it. We'll pay some sweat equity. And if we get this idea off the ground, I'll be more than proud of it. And in the end, I should first of all point out, we got every one of our 85% of those clients back, bar one. They eventually realized that things don't just stop. In fact, it's the opposite. We need to keep developing ideas and developing people. But in the meantime, we had created a new school out of nowhere. And it's remarkable because the business model for the school is innovative. It's actually a construction project where we've built a village during the pandemic in the hills of Transylvania next to the city of Cluj. And all of those sold, and they needed a school. So 2 of the houses were knocked together to make the first school. The construction of phase 2, which turns this village into a town, is underway, and all those homes are being sold, which means we're able to open a middle and high school in a couple of years. And we've just hired our first head of school, all the way from Buenos Aires, an Englishman coming with his family to the hills of Transylvania to run that school. What's magic about the school is it's not for children. Most schools have this one group of learners, and Colina Learning Centre has 2, children and adults. It's actually a dual curriculum school, because we felt that the vision for the school is that we'll build a learning culture through every home. And I think actually a lot of schools would have that as a purpose, as a goal. But you can't do that unless you're in every home. And so the purpose of the school is to support everyone, adults and kids, to learn how to thrive in life. And the curriculum is designed in a way that the children have their program, which is tied to standards, New York State standards, in fact, and will lead to qualifications in a traditional sense. But alongside that is a curriculum that parents, grandparents, aunts and uncles, locals in the community can engage with, to talk about the same themes in a different way, and look at how they grow their brain, their heart, their physical health, their spiritual health as well. And kind of the community is incredible. It's a school that has its own organic farm on site. It has an incredibly robust, rigorous early years curriculum in place already. And the learning is designed for children and adults equally. And I think that's phenomenal. And the impact it's had when we hadn't even advertised any jobs, and we found ourselves with job applications streaming in because people said, I just want to work for that school. That's the kind of thing I want to be part of. And so in August, 2 and a bit years after helping to create the vision and the purpose and the curriculum and the even down to some of the physical aspects of the school. I've never actually been on site, and I've never met any of the team in person before. So in August this year, I'll get a chance to go and hang out in the school that I helped to build for the first time, which is extraordinary and crazy. I'm looking forward to it.
That sounds amazing. I have absolutely no words other than that sounds amazing.
It's
really
crazy. And they good faith. We talk about good faith. The good faith they showed in us. This is a kind of VC venture capital type people from Silicon Valley who've, they've made their money and they want to invest it in something worthwhile. And they fell in love with Romania, as a lot of people do when they visit it. And he says, right, we'll build a village and we'll build the world's best school, which is basically what we're trying to do. But I met with the board and said, yeah, they said, we're not sure what's going to happen with construction, whether the project's going to be a success, because no one knows what's happening in the world at this point. This was in March 2020. And when I said, look, I'll do it for free, I'll do it in return for good feeling, they said, you sure? I said, yeah, I'm in. And they trusted us to do good work. And what we've done is just blown expectations out of the water. So there's a whole new Romanian family over there for me to enjoy at some point when I get over.
We'll build the best school in the world. Folks, that's the show title right there.
You don't have to actually manage to do it, but trying is the important part.
Yeah, I don't. Martin Luther King, he didn't say I have an idea. He said I have a dream. So
yeah. And it's interesting. I think schools have to think about their families. When you're starting from scratch, you choose the family that you want to come to the school. So we want to be the best school in the world for dynamic, enlightened families who want to thrive in this kind of connected world. So most of the people moving to this community are homeworkers. They are digital people. They understand it. They have a sense of design. They don't think that their kid is going to necessarily go to Harvard to be successful in life. And so they're also making the school what it is. They're quite a refreshing bunch.
And can I ask a silly question? What does it look like? What does the 9 to 5 look like? Or what does you walk in the door? Draw us a picture.
It's having never been, it's quite hard to draw a picture.
This is exactly why I asked you, because I want to hear your picture. And then my next question is, I wonder, will that picture match up to?
Well, it's inspired a great deal by Scottish Gordonstoun expeditionary learning, influenced by all the work that Ron and Ron Berger and colleagues over in the States have done in expeditions, influenced heavily by what then the team at XB School in the north of England have done with it, infused with the research and design cycle that we've been working on for the last 12 years. So when you walk in, you'll see kids, whatever age they are, they'll be in one of 5 stages of learning. They'll either be discovering, which is all that immersing into something new. They'll be, and that discovery is using all 4 senses. So they are out in the mud, they are in the garden, they're doing all that kind of stuff. They're not just in a class or in a space. We have a dream phase, which is allowing kids to dream. So this is what you've just kind of been exposed to. What would you like to do with it? And so negotiating curriculum with children. What do we do next? Researching. So now that you've settled on a research goal, go do your homework. So be interested in stuff that you wouldn't normally be interested in. Expand what you know. Build your understanding of stuff that you think you know, but you're not sure. Build your knowledge. Knowledge is super important in this as well, because they can't really progress their ideas unless they know, but they have a deep desire to learn new stuff because they've got this dream that they've come up with. Then really important, do it. So manifest, move into action. You can probably hear a little bit of teach meet pedagogy coming in there as well. So, shaping, get feedback and keep going, persevere. And then the final part is transform. So really important is that we measure the impact of what young people or the adult learners actually achieve. So there is showcasing, there is celebrating all the stuff you'd see in any school, but there's also looking at expanding beyond the school into the community. And actually we're exploring Colina Nua communities in lots of other places around the world, in Latin America at the moment. So there'll be that opportunity as well to share ideas and see if they work in a completely different context. when you walk in, these are very little people at the moment. They're 4, 5, 6 years old at the moment. We have double the number of kids than we can cope with. And so the need to expand is there. But if you want to see what it looks like, you go to kalinalearning.com. Kalina is Romanian for hill. So kalinalearning.com. And you'll see plenty of some of the most beautifully shot practitioner video that you will ever see in the world. The one thing we do really well at Notosh and with the team at Galina Nua is branding and storytelling. So you will see beautiful stories told in HD 4K. So enjoy going to have a look at that.
Building the best school in the world is an intriguing concept. Now, if you want to know more about that podcast, or if you want to hear a bit more from Ewan, well, you can go back. You can get that podcast on Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. You can download it. Please, we'd ask you to download and subscribe, because that affects our numbers, and it means we can it changes the algorithm. You know yourself. I'm not going to bore you with all those details. But we do want listeners. So if you enjoyed it, tell a friend. If you didn't enjoy it, don't tell anybody. One of the other guests we had on was Kate Kogi. Kate Kogi's from America, and she's an educator over there. And the interview itself was very, very interesting. We talk about making the maker ethos, the virtual environment, virtual learning, and some of the stuff that she's doing in her school and indeed in her setup over in America. Now, you're going to want to listen to this, because I enjoyed this interview, but I'll be honest with you, it sounds a bit daft. I actually enjoyed listening back to it, if you know what I mean. Like, she has an awful lot to say, and frankly, if the hour wasn't up, we'd still be talking now. This is Kate Kogi.
I mean, the thing about the virtual environment is it sort of really just made even more clear to me the divide between sort of the have and have-nots within, society, but also just within the K-12 environment. I had students who I never saw in the virtual environment. They had too many other things going on at home, and if they were home, they needed to do something else, like help out with siblings or make food or work. And joining in on school was really secondary in that dynamic. And so in some ways, I see how the virtual classroom really emphasized that in many ways. And it really just, we see how for some students, the virtual environment was really beneficial. And, I think if it were me going through that as, a middle schooler, during that time, I probably would have loved it. But I know for many, that's not the case. And so I think that, what I love about the virtual environment, and one thing that I've been able to do with students is connect them, they're at school right now, but being able to connect them with people from around the world who they otherwise wouldn't be able to be in contact with. This past couple months, I've been able to introduce them to folks within the Smithsonian who are doing amazing work all over the globe. And I never really would have thought of that prior to this. I just would have been like, oh, they can email or we can watch a video about them. But I had students in Admiral County who were looking at ArcGIS data along with the scientists and researchers who made that data and put it together. And they were going through, images and sort of rating them. They're looking at oyster reefs in the Chesapeake Bay, but being able to do that with these people in person is just, it's such a memorable experience. And so what I hope is that while in the beginning, I think in the pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic, it really showcased, what needed to be done. But there is so much that technology can add to the classroom environment, so many cool new connections that we can have, so many ways where we can all kind of come together and, build that tech literacy that students are they catch on quick. And so watching a student work in a Google Doc or work in work in any space. I've done Minecraft-based projects with students before. I'm terrible at Minecraft. I don't know what I'm doing, but my students are great at it. And so giving them the option is like, hey, if you can show me what you're talking about here in this Minecraft world that you've created, great. Like, that's all I need. And it just, yeah,
and that's part of the inclusivity. That's the thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, there are teachers out there that, why did you become a teacher? I became a teacher to catch the person like I was in school. That's one answer. You know, I can see, and that's the whole inclusivity. And I feel that the virtual learning space has created that, and I feel we need to hold on to that, and our ability to teach over a virtual environment. I think that's key. I think we need to remove the terminologies. We need to forget about Zoom, docs, whatever. The kids don't use those. They just go, oh yeah, I opened the thing and I typed the thing, and how did you not get that?
Yeah.
Look at, I've asked that question to every single guest. I had to ask yourself, but come on, let's move on to the nitty gritty. The K-12 Albemarle Lab School and the Albert Einstein Distinguished Educator Fellowship with the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum. What? Discuss.
Sure, we can talk about the school. It's a community lab school. It's in Admiral County Schools in Virginia. It's I worked in the middle school, so grades 6 through 8. Students were about 11 to 14, and then but our school is middle and high. So basically, wide range of ages all together in one building. Really, the focus has been just sort of driving student agency. So, we really try to create, so it's all project-based. So rather than, you have your science class, your math class, your language arts class, like chunking it into parts of the day, we really try to take a more holistic approach to that environment. And so really thinking about how people really learn. Like, nobody in the real world like approaches things like in that mindset. And so really trying to come up with ways where students can take on these interdisciplinary projects together in a space where they can experiment and take risks. And so it was such a challenge to do that sort of work because, if you teach subject by subject, there's materials out there, what's next in the sequence of events. But with brand new projects, it's just like, okay, what are we going to do? What's a thing that comes to mind? And so it's so challenging, but so fun. I've had such a great time. Like when we were virtual, we did we called it the Great Biologist Baking Show, where students created their own sourdough starter. They came to the school. Actually, we had to get all of these materials out to the students. They came to the school where we dropped off, sourdough starter at their house out in the middle of nowhere. And so from home, they had all their lab equipment, and we'd be on Zoom, and we'd be feeding the starter, talking about it, sort of talking about the chemical changes, but also, the artistic elements of baking. So our art teacher actually came in. He did bread art with Barnes. And so we went through different ways where you could cut your loaf or, braid it to get different qualities of it. And it was so fun. And I love the Great British Baking Show. And so we actually made episodes for the Great Biologist Baking Show, talking about sort of all of the different processes that go into bread. And not just sourdough, but just bread in general, sort of the cultural aspects, the artistic elements, every single piece. And it was so much fun to work on this with my teaching team, because when we were sort of coming up with, the components of this, we were just in a room, sitting in a circle, just throwing ideas out there, getting excited and mapping it out. And that's how the projects work there, is sort of, before we even start it, we come together weeks in advance, and we, just sit and we just talk about what's the thing you want to do, and just going into it. And it
must be amazing to work in an environment like that, to be able to sit down with a group of people and just go, hey, what are we going to do next?
It's amazing. Oh gosh. And the students love it too, because it's like nothing they've seen before. They really get to engage with whatever it is they're doing. And I really tried with many of the projects to engage the Admiral County community or the Charlottesville community within the work. So students got to, the school itself is in downtown Charlottesville. It's a small city, but you can walk to things. And so they're walking distance to so many great places. And so we did a scale model of the solar system on Charlottesville's downtown mall one year, where the students actually, we talked about the planets in the solar system, and then we measured it out, where would each planet go? And it was right before the holidays, and the students each designed a structure, a thing to represent their planet that they were working on. And it didn't have to necessarily be like a sphere. It could be like, the Roman god that it's about, or it could be, I remember the Earth representation was like a potted plant that they had designed to, represent life. But the coolest thing was, like, they were also, the Charlottesville's downtown mall, it's about a mile, it's a little less than a mile. So we had to measure it out and we had to mark each point. But we had all of the students out in this giant marketplace, basically, with people out holiday shopping. And they'd walk up to the kids. They were out there with this like pedestal they had made with their planet on it. And the students got to talk about their planet with people. So like, I encourage them, like, have people ask, like, come up with questions, like get people interested in your planet and why they should know about it. And they made little QR codes, and the students actually, they wrote and walked into many of the businesses downtown, and their planets got to stay on the downtown mall throughout the whole holiday season. So it's sort of like when you mentioned having a student call the air traffic control, like I had students go into these businesses and they were just like, hey, I want to put Saturn in your movie theater. Would that be okay? And everyone was into it. We had all the planets plus Pluto and Ceres and the sun on Charlottesville's downtown mall for 2 weeks. And people could scan the QR codes and learn more about them. And the students were really proud of that work, but just coming up with that and the coordination of, having kids on this giant walking wall an afternoon.
I was going to sidestep that. The logistics of
it was,
I want to be at that meeting where you approach someone and say, we're going to take a bunch of students and we're going to bring them down the town.
We had a lot of parents out, thank goodness. So a lot of parents came out. The news came out too, which was honestly kind of helpful too. But so it was great. The students really, they had so much fun. It's great to get them out there, and it was great to be a part of a team where, people encouraged that type of stuff. Like
That's Kate Kogi there talking to us about being part of a good team. One of the things that struck me about that interview, if you want to listen back to it, of course, it's available to download, was the idea of changing the learning environment. So the learning environment doesn't have to be a classroom. The learning environment traditionally was a classroom, but the learning environment can be anywhere. And the idea that you take students out of the classroom and put them in a real life environment, a shopping street in that case, is intriguing to me. And it's not easy. I know it's not easy, and there's an awful lot behind it. But when it works, it really does work. Now I know some of you are saying, yeah, but when it doesn't, it's. But don't think about that. Think about, I'm going to make this work. Not will it work? It will work, and we're going to learn from it. The next interview from Season 2 was with Russell Tarr. Russell Tarr was one of the first people we interviewed on the CESI Staffroom. And again, the same as Katie, if I didn't cut it off after a particular time, we'd still be talking now. Russell is a very, very interesting educator. I'll let him kick things off.
Well, like a lot of people from my experience, I didn't kind of set out with any great vocation to be a history teacher. I finished my history degree and I absolutely loved that. And then after that, I wasn't quite sure what to do with it. And in fact, I took a year off, worked around Germany for a while, just in bars. Then I actually did a PGCE in history teaching, but didn't particularly enjoy it. I didn't like the head of department very much, to be frank. He just kept giving me lesson plans and didn't give me any leeway to be creative at all. So I thought, this isn't the job for me. And then somehow or other, I managed to end up in an accountancy firm for 12 months, which led to my Damascene moment, I suppose, when I decided that actually maybe teaching wasn't quite so bad after all compared to bean counting. So I applied on a whim to Wolverhampton Grammar School and just tried my luck, gave it a really strong application. I tried my best anyway. And fortunately, was offered a job there. And from there, that's where it's progressed. It was a fantastic opportunity, wonderful school, Wolverhampton Grammar School, great colleagues, great students. And it was there in my first year that I met my now wife. She was on an Erasmus program. She was the French assistant at the time. And within a few years, we'd sort of gone as far as we could go in Wolverhampton Grammar School, and there weren't really any promotion opportunities, but at the same time, it was really comfortable. So I thought, well, if I'm going to move, it's got to be to something very different, which is a real life change. So I thought, I'm going to try and get into the international circuit rather than simply have more of the same in another school. And it so happened that an opportunity came up in Toulouse. I knew the head of department there from a conference I'd attended. And I applied for that job, and we moved over to the south of France, and that's where I've raised a family of 3 children. I've been there ever since. That's 15 years now, actually.
What's it like moving to an international, or what's it like teaching in an international school?
It's absolutely fantastic in many ways, very different in some respects. I think our school is quite particular and always has been in that it was the very first school to be fully laptop equipped. It was made the boast that it was the first fully laptop school. It was one of the things that drew me to it. And it had been that way since it was founded in 1999. So having access to technology on tap, not having to book a computer room on a regular basis and finding it's been block booked by some sociopathic colleague again. Absolutely superb, So I could go into a class and know that all of my students would have access to a laptop and the internet, and that just gave me free rein. Beyond that, in terms of the international dimension, at first it wasn't particularly international. We had about 70% British students. But over time, it's become more and more international. We're at a school which is basically a subsidiary of Airbus. And so we cater for families of engineers who are often on short-term contracts for just 2 or 3 years. And depending on the projects, we might get a large influx, for example, of South Korean students for a few years, followed by a large contingent of Spanish or Indian. So as a result, for a history teacher, it's a real challenge, but a really interesting one to construct a syllabus which is not Anglo-centric, but also less and less Eurocentric. So a lot of the materials I produce are becoming more and more global, things like the Silk Roads, Voyages of Discovery, and so on.
That's
a challenge.
That kind of ties into where I was going with that, in that because it's an international school, the student, how does your teaching change because of the students there are from so many different backgrounds? Or does it change at all? Am I completely wrong about that?
Obviously, it throws up certain challenges in terms of language acquisition and so on. You have to differentiate quite a lot as far as is ever possible. You've got to be culturally sensitive as well to the fact that, for example, 2 examples spring to mind. With Spanish students, we study the Spanish Civil War as part of our IB studies. And some of the students are very, very engaged with that if they come from that background. We have a lot of kids whose families originally came across the Pyrenees as refugees during the Franquist regime, for example. But by the same token, a lot of them, for exactly the same reason, don't want to talk about that. And it's just off the table as part of a family discussion. So you have to be sensitive to the fact that although you might assume that because this is part of their national history, they'd be quite keen to engage and discuss it, the opposite is sometimes true. And the same is true for South Koreans. I had one year where the GCSE compulsory source work paper was the Korean War. And so I just blundered into asking my students, well, go home and ask your parents what their opinion is of the Korean War or how their families were caught up in it. And basically got letters back from parents to the management saying this is just not appropriate. We don't discuss this. So I always thought I was being kind of culturally sensitive and trying to draw in their experiences, but you can put your foot in it sometimes without realizing. But like anything, it's a process of experience, isn't it? But it makes for a very rich sort of classroom environment, because I can teach the Middle East crisis and have 3 ultra-Zionists in the room from Israel.
I suppose that's really where I'm going with that in the back of my head now. I wasn't going to go there, but yeah, how do you teach that sensitively?
Well, it sharpens your basic historical skills, because any good history teacher is going to provide students with different perspectives on the same event and ask them to look at the evidence and think it through for themselves without judgment, So that is part of my job. I mean, I got a present from my grade 12 last year, actually, my final year students. They brought me a metronome, and that apparently was their nickname for me. And they've made a series of memes for me called the metronome, because I can come into a lesson and give them a very right-wing view of a particular event very deliberately. And then the following lesson come in and say, of course, what I told you there was a load of rubbish, and then give them a very left-wing view of exactly the same thing. And they're always asking themselves, well, what exactly is your view on it? So it doesn't really matter what my view is, does it? It's the fact that I'm giving you the different perspectives. But in terms of the Middle East, that was one of my best examples, where I had these 3 very ultra-Zionists who we once had a lesson where they had to divide a map between the Palestinians and the would-be Israelis, the Jewish settlers at the end of World War II. And so I divided them into Palestinians and into Jewish settlers. And I'd split the ultra-Zionists between 3 different groups, but all 3 groups came back with a map which was simply shaded in one colour for the Jewish settlers. And when I said, well, what about the Palestinians? They just spit back at me, what about the Palestinians? They're not even a people. So managing that's quite difficult, but they ended up really fantastic students. And one of them went away and joined the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. And I had a Google Hangout with him, with my students.
Wow.
Fully expecting him to be very biased. And I primed my students to be aware of the fact that he was a very subjective witness. But in fact, he'd matured considerably and had been part of a program in Israel where students from a Jewish background were mixing with students from Palestinian backgrounds together at university as part of a cultural awareness program. And his perspective on the whole Arab-Israeli conflict very much broadened out and matured.
That was Russell Tarr there talking to us about, teaching in an international school, being a history teacher. If you want to hear more about that, the story, go to Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcast, and you can listen back to that. The next interview was a very easy interview for me to do, because Kate is a friend, Kate is a colleague. I've worked with Kate in with regards to CESI. Kate is CESI secretary. Now, that means Kate tells us where to be, what to do, and how to do it. I'm not going to lie, that's what she does. But Kate is also an educator. She's in 3rd level. And I started off by asking her, how do you think, or what have we learned, or what are we going to take away from the pandemic and lockdown? And will we take anything at all?
Kate, the question I've put forward, and I have been putting forward since the very first sort of staff room, and I'm asking everybody, people on the street, random people, how do you think things are going to change? How, in your opinion, how do you think people are going to go, oh, thank God this is over, let's go back to it? Or do you think people are going to go, my God, we've learned some great skills, I'm going to use them to support my teaching?
Yeah, the cautiously optimistic side of me says, yeah, everyone's going to learn from what happened and and absolutely embrace everything that we've done. The logical, side of me is looking at what's happening in our own context, or even across the project, and that return to normal, that very much being enforced. So I remain conflicted. I think it is a wasted opportunity to take anything positive from the experience if we don't try to adopt some of what we did. Because especially in our case, some of the work we've done around inclusion and universal design, and the way people redesigned their teaching to include more learners because it gave them space to think about, how they would adapt in this online setting and adopting new things. To see any of those practices abandoned is, it wouldn't just be a waste, it would just be the greatest shame. So I think it's going to take time. I think the problem is, and it's actually relevant across probably every sector, every workplace, is honestly that people haven't had any chance to reflect. At what point are things going to calm down enough where, everyone has 2 months of a summer to say, you know what, we're going to think about our practice and we're going to, sift through things. It's I don't think that's happened yet.
Yeah, and I suppose that was one of the questions, one of the discussion points I had with at the very, very start. I can't remember off the top of my head now, but it was, when is the reflection going to take place? We are educators, you are educators, we are educators. At some point, we need to stop, drop, and reflect.
Yeah.
But I fear that that's not going to happen. I fear that we're just going to stop, drop. Summer's here, back to school again, all done, without the reflection. Because I firmly believe, and I work with teachers all the time, they're not seeing the skill set that they've gained. And the mind boggles. I'm going, last year you didn't know what a PowerPoint was. This year you've created a virtual classroom.
Yeah.
That's our very own, CESI's very own Kate Malloy talking to us there. Again, an interesting interview, and if you want more about that, the crack, download it, find it on the Apple podcast. It's there in full, it's in its entirety. The last but not least, we got an opportunity to interview Joe Dale. Joe Dale is a languages teacher. If you're on Twitter and you don't know who Joe Dale is, you're missing a trick with Twitter. Joe uses Twitter on a regular basis. Joe has a very big Twitter reach. He's very open on Twitter. You can reach out to him, so definitely do reach out to him. We got a chance to reach out to him here, and we asked him really where did it all start?
Okay, so basically I was a languages teacher for 13 years. I taught secondary school level for 3 years and then 10 years at middle school level. I went to my middle school in 1999, and as I said, I worked there for 10 years. So that was really when I developed an interest in technology, how technology can enhance language learning in particular, although I do lots of cross-curricular sessions now, more and more actually as a result of the pandemic through webinars, etc. But that's my background. And then around 2002, I think it was, I came across what is now the Linguoscope website, which at the time was called bonjour.org.uk. And I was blown away by these sorts of hot potato type of activities. Those people who don't know hot potatoes, it's like it's a multimedia suite you could download from a university in Canada, and you could design your own activities, things like, drag and drop and gap fills and that sort of thing. And I was really impressed by the bonjour.org.uk website, and I thought, wow, this is fantastic. I was so keen. I asked my school if I could go on a course in Colchester, and it so happened the day that I went, it was snowing, and so the course was cancelled. But there were two people who'd also come from Bolton, if I remember correctly, or from the northwest. Anyway, had come down. And then what we did was we went to, I think it was at McDonald's, if I remember correctly, and spent about 2 or 3 hours there just sharing tips and tricks about how to use technology in languages, which was amazing. And then I went back on the course. It actually ran whenever it was, a few months later. But that's how I started. And then through lots and lots of dedication and using the internet and connecting with people and being on Twitter a little bit later on. But I mean, from there, I sort of got into PowerPoint and all that sort of stuff. And then I sort of found my tribe, as it were, around 2006 or so, when I started blogging and connecting with, the world out there more, rather than just being on different forums and what have you and picking up some ideas. But it was more when I got into the whole blogging and podcasting, again through Ewan McIntosh, who really inspired me back in the day. I sort of found my feet, as it were, and found my tribe.
Yeah, and to be fair, Ewan McIntosh, if you don't recognize the name, you should. I think he inspires an awful lot of people, to be honest with you. Using technology in education, I mean, CESI is the Computers in Education Society of Ireland, and as it happens, 2023 will see 50 years. That's 50 years of technology in education, or computers in education. When it comes to languages, you just mentioned it briefly there. How do you see the use of technology when using languages in education? How do you see the supports there?
Okay, so I think you can sort of divide the use of technology in languages into sort of two main areas. The first area would be that sort of receptive, independent language learning model using sites like Quizlet and Duolingo and Memrise, the way in which technology really lends itself to spaced repetition and retrieval practice, and the fact that the students can learn on the move. They can learn, when they're coming in to school on the bus or when they're going for a walk, and that whole mechanistic type of learning, the way in which you can, the algorithms can help you to remind you of the words you need to work on. You can have these types of streaks whereby you gain points the more that you hit the levels expected, the way in which you can, maybe if you're not particularly good at organizing yourself, then things like Quizlet and so on and so forth will really help you to remind you of what it is that you need to work on. And that idea of little and often, which teachers have known about obviously for years and years and years, this idea of the Ebbinghaus learning curve, that you can review the content that you're studying every day, let's say, and by the end of the week, when you take your, let's say, final test in class, then you should do better compared to if you try and cram everything at the last minute. So I think that from an independent learning point of view, the tools I mentioned already are really helpful in enhancing language learning by going through that, what could be regarded as quite boring mechanistic vocab practice or grammar practice, but it helps to forge new neural pathways in the brain by virtue of the fact that you are practicing maybe much, much more using that sort of traditional methodology, but using the technology compared to if you were to do the same sort of thing on paper with pen.
That was Joe Dale there. Thank you very much, Joe. And that's all we have time for. Now, I said it before, I'll say it again. If you're interested, please let us know. If you want to get involved, we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to know what you're doing in your school. We'd love you to subscribe to our podcast, and if we can help you, let us know. We'd be absolutely delighted to help. Can't emphasize it enough. This is what the kids are saying. Subscribe, download. Let us know your feedback. And as I said, if you've enjoyed it, tell a friend. If you didn't enjoy it, tell nobody, and I would love to hear from you. You can always get us on Twitter at CESI Tweets. You can get me directly on Twitter, Hassandaba, at Hassandaba. You can get me on Instagram. Just type it into Google. I'm the other one. Type it into Google and you know what I'm talking about. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to get your feedback. Season 3 is going to be an exciting one. Season 3 is all about CESI 50 years old, and we have some very interesting interviews from then, the journey so far, and CESI now. So until I talk to you again, take care. Chat to you soon.